Here we're going to talk about two things, technology and people, and how both prove resilient against the seemingly impossible to become the inevitable. It turns out that our best investments come when everyone else thinks that some technology is impossible, that it will never work, it will never happen. Yet we believe for some reason that it's inevitable. And that's because we see arrows of progress that point to what's next. Unthwarted by shocks or wars or market crashes, technology is resilient. But of course, technologies don't invent themselves. People do. And people, not just unthwarted by shocks, but driven by them. Because progress often comes from people who often came from life circumstances that seemed impossible. It could be shocks, terrible childhoods, tragedy, loss, rejection, people who, because of adversity, not in spite of it, have an inextinguishable flame that gets lit. This propulsive force, resilience, that against the seemingly impossible makes great achievement inevitable. And it makes the bad stuff of great adversity often lead to the good stuff of great ambition and achievement. Now, here's the thing, good or bad, all stuff happens because of motive forces. With no motive force, you have no change, only stasis. Change requires something acting on something else. And we will argue that there are two main kinds of motive forces. The first are the forces of physics. This is stuff acting on stuff. And the second are the forces of psychology. Stuff acting on stuff, people, who act back. Now in the first case, the force of physics, be it Mother Nature or natural disasters, these things have no intentions, no motivation, no desire. It is just stuff acting on stuff. Now, some of these systems under forces and shocks, they just break. And others will prove robust to be able to withstand shocks. And other systems will bounce back with resilience and then some. And other systems will stumble and bounce back without missing a beat. But the shocking thing about shocks is that more things don't fail, that most systems prove to be resilient and bounce back. And we see this resilience across environments and ecosystems, from microbes to mammals and to markets, and from new startups to nation states, and of course in technology. Now, technology's resilience rises up from past problems and failures. Those failures taught something, whether it was through evolution or engineering. If you take the problem of crowded cities, this gets solved by technology to build skyscrapers, which then endure shocks and failures from things like earthquakes. And then from those failures, new technology then evolves to turn resilient to old shocks. In fact, most new technologies in the present are solving problems that were created by old technologies in the past, which means that our new technologies today will create problems yet to be solved by even newer technologies in the future. And this is the force that drives that arrow of technological progress. These forces of physics, these failures, these problems, to which technology proves resilient, always improving. Witness many of the things that Lux invests in. Across industries, in energy, you can see the arrow of progress as we move to more and more energy density per unit of raw material. We go from the carbohydrates of wood to the hydrocarbons of coal and oil and natural gas to the atoms of uranium and nuclear. In lighting, we go from the flame of fire to the filament of an incandescent bulb to light-emitting diodes, LEDs. And that flow of technology is clear, to less heat and more light. In memory, we go from storing things on punch cards to spinning magnetic disks, to solid-state memory with no moving parts. In displays, we go from cave drawings with dye etched on rock, to static paint on canvas, to black and white moving images. And then we move on to dynamic high-def color. And from there, we go to volumetric displays in full 3D by our company Looking Glass. And then we progress to untethered free space light projection, made by companies like Lightform. And in capturing light and images, we trend from capturing 2D black and white images to capturing rich full color images, to capturing full 3D scans of both homes and humans, done by companies like Matterport and Scatter. And in medical imaging, we trend from static 2D black and white X-ray images to animated images of MRI scans to full 3D scan fly-throughs of inside your organs by companies like 3Scan. And we see this directional arrow of technology in surgery. We proceed from open surgery, slicing skin and cracking ribs, leaving very large scars, to better arthroscopic surgery, leaving smaller scars, to robotic surgery that leaves no scars. You can enter the body with endoluminal access, like our company Auris, and get to targets from the inside out. In design, the arrow of progress proceeds from the hand-drafting engineering designs of man to 2D computer automated design, to three-dimensional full-color CAD, and then to generative design, where you specify the parameters of what you want and the AI designs the object for you. In manufacturing, we've trended from handcrafted artisans to fully autonomously 3D printed. In assembly, we've trended from a line of humans laboring repetitively to a humanless assembly line of robots. And those vehicles are means of transport. We see the same technological trend. We've trended from manual control, shifting gears and clutches, to automatic control, where our eyes are on the road and our hands are on the wheel, to autonomous control like Zooks, merging onto complex highways with no human direction. And with each of these vessels, be they cars on the road, or sail drones at sea, or satellites by planet, we trend not only from manual to autonomous, but from isolated to networked. And we see the same trend in our computers. We trend from isolated mainframes to networked PCs and laptops and phones. And we trend in the networks and their architecture from centralized to distributed to decentralized. And we trend in the processors and the chips that control these networks and computers, as we go from centralized Intel CPUs to servers with NVIDIA GPUs to edge devices running ASICs and FPGAs made by Lux companies like Mythic and FlexLogix. And remember, this arrow of progress in physics and technology, it has no intention, no desire, it's just a force that flows forward. And we also trend in how we humans physically connect to and control our devices. And we can observe the trend of progress that we call the half-life of technology intimacy. With each half-life of time, tech gets closer and closer to our bodies. And so we move from the distant interactions of monolithic mainframes to tickling the keys of a desktop, to a laptop touching our legs, to a phone cradled in our hands all day, separated from our body only by a thin film of fabric in our pockets, and then on to wrist computers in constant contact with our skin, and to devices inside our ears. And who would have ever thought that we would have a need for AirPods, especially when we had something like this?
Is talking on the phone getting out of hand? Look out! You need Phone Relief, the ultimate in hands-free phone design. Watch. Simply attach the special double back fastener to any phone. Then attach the Phone Relief headset. It's that easy. Hands-free, pain-free. You'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Now only $12.95. Call toll-free to order by credit card.
And then we move to voice and gesture. And these are devices that are connected directly but non-invasively to our intentions. And this is where the seemingly impossible, again, becomes inevitable. And that is why, against all the uncertainty, we can be certain about the arrows of technological progress. It never stops. It's resilient to wars, political chaos, high interest rates or low, stock market calm, or volatility. Now, the way to maintain the resilience of the system is by allowing it to probe its boundaries. To make a forest resilient to fire, it must be allowed to burn so that it can adapt and survive and thrive. And that same thing holds for mankind. The resilience of mankind as a system is that we probe the boundaries. We take for granted the very wide range of environments to which man has adapted, from extreme cold to extreme heat, and from the outer reaches of outer space to the deep depths of undersea. And we also take for granted the very wide range of extreme events to which markets adapt. Markets, after all, are just the sum total of people's different expectations. And when something unexpected happens, a shock, what's remarkable is not that markets plummet and people panic, but how incredibly quickly they recover. The Cuban Missile Crisis, it sent markets down 3%, but recovered in 5 days. And the Kennedy assassination sent the markets down 3%, but recovered in 2 days. Reagan's shooting saw the market recover in 4 days. The collapse of long-term capital management took just 2 weeks to recover. What about the horrific terror events of 9/11 that sent the markets down 12%, fully recovered within 4 weeks? And the flash crash of 2010 and the Japanese tsunami saw markets recover within 4 and 6 days respectively. What's shocking is that the median time to recovery of all of these shocks was under a month. So the common thing about uncommon events is that people in them bounce back. Why? Because of motive forces. And if that first motive force that we covered was physics, stuff acting on stuff, which causes shocks and forces systems and technologies to evolve, then the second kind of force is psychology. When stuff acts on stuff, people, who act back. Now, notably, when we describe someone who is really driven, we say she is a force of nature. Motivation, drive. As Vince Lombardi said, it's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get back up. Now, not to trivialize the very raw and real and persistent pain that many feel, but researchers who study human resilience, they find that most of the time people get back up and then some. From divorce to death of loved ones to job loss and life-threatening events. This is my friend and neighbor Elisa, who about 2 years ago, like any of us, went out to celebrate her 40th birthday, and improbably caught a horrible infection and horrifically ended up losing both hands and feet. And this is her today.
Come on! Nice.
At the time of an extreme event, people could never imagine that within a year they'd report themselves only slightly less happy. And sometimes events that we think are terrible later prove to have unanticipated positives. And of course the opposite is true as well. As Shakespeare said, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This is especially true in national history. The US celebrated the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Yet Putin, reeling from perceived mistreatment after the collapse of his country, said recently, "If you compress the spring all the way to its limit, it will snap back hard. You must always remember this." Now, comedian Dave Chappelle told a very serious story of 14-year-old African-American Emmett Till, who, while visiting his family in the South, allegedly whistled at a white woman outside of a convenience store, and was then days later abducted and brutally murdered by her husband. And Emmett's body was found dumped in a river, his face horribly disfigured. But his mother insisted on an open casket, so that the world could see what they'd done to our baby boy. And his image would appear on every newspaper across the country. And tens of thousands of people came to his funeral to say that enough was enough. And as Chappelle says, if the civil rights movement was a car, this was the high-octane fuel, the catalyst that set things off. And the reason that he told this story was about a year ago, the woman who Emmett allegedly whistled at had just admitted on her deathbed that she lied. And at first angered by that revelation, Chappelle came to realize that that lie caused a murder. And that murder set in motion a sequence of events that made his own life possible, that made an African-American man able to become elected president. And as he says, that was the lie that saved us. That Access Hollywood moment, with these three locked in arms, that would lead to millions locked in arms in protest, and would lead to the Me Too movement, and millions in protest, and record number of women running for and being elected to office, seizing their rightful place in part because of, not in spite of, Trump's hot mic on that bus. Now, notably, with terrible, historic, tragic moments, we typically say two words. We say, never forget. And we say this not to keep suffering, but because we know that in the horrible parts of our past history, there are important warnings and lessons for the future. Yet when it comes to individuals, we say, turn the other cheek, or let it go, or forgive and forget, don't hold a grudge. We tell someone to forget the most important warnings and lessons from their own life history. Now, most moments in life are fleeting and ephemeral, without much meaning. They pass by in an instant or a second, and we take them for granted. Other, less ordinary moments we won't forget, like the moment a baby takes her very first steps.
Yay! Bob, no! No, Bob! No, Lydia. Ew. Oh!
But on the other hand, some moments are so salient and emotionally laden with meaning that they can last a lifetime, viscerally, visually replaying, words echoing in a mind like a chord of music. Now, sometimes we gain through loss. We all seek comfort and happiness, but of course, progress doesn't come from happiness. Happiness, by definition, is liking the way that things are. And progress comes from change, and change comes from discontent. That source of discontent, it might come from childhood, tragedy or troubles, rivalry or revenge, a grudge, a quest to disprove doubters. When we were founding Lux, Pete and I so vividly remember a meeting with a certain partner at a certain VC firm who very smugly and dismissively told us that we were so cute and young and should go to business school. Now, this person is no longer active and surely doesn't remember, but we never forgot. It drove us. The bad stuff can often lead to the good stuff. And we see this in our love of superheroes, which comes from their very human origin stories. Abandoned, abused, orphaned, disabled. Take Spider-Man, orphaned. Or let's take some real-life superheroes, like Alex Honnold, who, like Spider-Man, scales 3,000-foot vertical granite cliffs with no ropes. Nothing. Now, Honnold was never hugged as a child, and he found comfort embracing a rock face and jamming fingers and toes into the tiniest of cracks and scampering upward. In his words, nobody achieves anything great by being happy and cozy. And consider the baby who at 9 months caught pneumonia and his mother gave him up for adoption. He described his adoptive father as austere and unsupportive and distant and wouldn't meet his mother again until he was 48. Circumstances none of us would celebrate, yet we do celebrate this baby. That's Larry Ellison. And notably, he said, "I have all the disadvantages required for success." When you come from nothing, you have nothing to lose. Or this baby, born into horrible poverty, on welfare. As a child, wore dresses made of potato sacks. She would grow up to be molested and raped repeatedly. Pregnant at 14, she would lose her son in infancy. She would lose her half-sister to drug addiction, her half-brother to AIDS, and she would go on to become one of the most influential, powerful, and wealthy people in the world. Many of the best entrepreneurs don't need social approval, or they thrive precisely because they never got it. They reject the rejectors. They give up on fitting in, and they move to stand out. Researchers have shown that the most effective response to adversity is to fight back, creative aggression. It could be a work of art, a composition, an invention, a scientific breakthrough. All these things often start with 3 words. I'll show them. Consider dyslexia. Many people do not like to talk about it, but dyslexia is also correlated with a very high incidence of another rare condition: success. It's been estimated about 1/3 of entrepreneurs and inventors have it. Famous dyslexics like Richard Branson, who struggled and dropped out of school, Einstein, who didn't speak until age 4, Edison, Churchill, Keira Knightley, Henry Ford, Aaron Brockovich, all of whom succeeded not in spite of their disadvantages, but because of it. They struggled to read and write, but learned to speak and influence and negotiate and cajole at a young age to survive. It turns out that insecurity and ambition make a powerful cocktail. Now, for me, a terrible cross-country custody battle had me taken by surprise by 2 detectives and transplanted to live with my father, who was a stranger. My defense mechanism was a fortress of solitude, a distrust of people, and a vigilant anticipation of the unexpected. And everyone at Lux knows to anticipate risk, and we say that failure comes from a failure to imagine failure. It's got deeper roots. For Reardon, founder and CEO of Control Labs, he was the youngest in a family of 10. And when he was 12, the family took in 8 more kids, all younger than Reardon, who suddenly had to grow up very quickly. And when we wonder how he manages a team of geniuses that range from neuroscientists to coders, we get it. Alex from the Lux team has a hard-working mom with a hard-to-understand Vietnamese accent. It stifled her career, and it angered him. And it's no wonder where his drive came from: to get into Yale, to become poet laureate, and to deliver the class graduation speech in front of 17,000 people. For Muneeb, founder of Blockstack, he grew up in Pakistan, where he had a single state-controlled TV channel. And as a teenager, he discovered that the version of history being taught to him at school and by that state-controlled media was not actually true. His internet connection, which was a rare thing in his town in the 90s, was his only window to free, open source of information. Set him on his path. It's why so many great founders are immigrants, or didn't go to college, or went to the wrong college, and especially if they're super talented but they lack the social status or the signals or the credentials or the connections, the market of employers doesn't value them. They are mispriced. So they make their own market. They do it themselves. As William Blake said, I must create my own system or be enslaved by another man's. It's that chip on their shoulder, that fire in their belly, that capacity to suffer, to hold a grudge, that becomes a propulsive force, a propellant, which is inextinguishable. That is the drive of people. And the drive of technology, this unstoppable march into the future, resilient to shocks, flowing forward across all industries, endlessly updating and replacing and resolving the old with the new, that is what Lux loves to find and fund. That drive of people, combined with that unstoppable march of technological progress, to make the seemingly impossible become inevitable.